You are listening to the podcast for learning the language of A Course in Miracles so you can understand the meaning, embody the message, and live the teachings as a way of life. Welcome to episode 18 of this podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Jennifer McSween, creator of this podcast, and the Course in Miracles practice coach for taking those who are studying the Course from inspiration to application. On this week's episode, I'm doing a part 2 to last week's episode, Relationships, the Classroom for Learning to Release Judgment. Now, if you listened to last week's episode, in closing, I said that next week, which is this week, I think I'll be talking about the happy dream, which is another central idea in the Course. And I said think because at the time I had this underlying feeling that I needed to say a bit more about relationships, simply because it is such a very significant theme in A Course in Miracles. So I decided to postpone that topic and instead do a part 2 on the topic of relationships without making it a training or teaching, but just to show the significant role that relationships play in a course, and particularly how they serve as the classrooms for releasing judgment. As I said, I want to do this without making it a training or a teaching session, because these podcast episodes are really not intended to be training sessions or to give in-depth teaching. The purpose of this podcast is to look at the themes, ideas, teachings, and words that are central to the Course, some of which are commonly used in the world, from the perspective of the Course. And the reason for this is that the Course uses words metaphorically. We ordinarily use and read words literally. If we take a literal approach when reading and studying the Course, we will not only not understand what the Course is really saying, but we'll be unable to embody the meaning, and as a result, have difficulty applying what the Course is teaching on a practical level in our lives. This is one of the most common problems we run into as Course students. You find yourself reading the words, feeling like you know what is being said, but you can't seem to grasp what it means, especially within the context of what is being said. And having had that experience myself, and hearing other Course students and clients of mine over the years complain about having this challenge, is really what motivated me to create this podcast. So as the title suggests, this podcast is really only for the purpose of understanding the language and the meaning behind the themes, the ideas, the teachings, and the words used in the Course from the perspective of the Course. Now, I do intend to offer an in-depth training or to do a deep dive on selected topics or selected podcast topics. But that will be in the future, and I don't think I'll be doing it in a podcast format. I would really like it to be some form of an interactive class or lesson series, complete with Q&A sessions. This way, you can have any questions that you may have, specific questions of your own that you may have answered. So those of you who would be interested in something like this, stay tuned. I'll let you know more about it later. But these weekly episodes are just to give you an overview of the selected topic, and again, within the context of the Course. So with regards to the overview of relationships in the Course, here's how it looks. Relationships play an extremely significant role in the Course because they literally are a mirror for our thoughts. In the title, I described them as the classrooms for learning to release judgment. And this is because the dynamics of our relationships can serve as a laboratory for the practice of forgiveness, which the Course teaches is the means to peace, healing, happiness, and ultimately the miracles that the Course in Miracles is designed to teach. And here's why. As I mentioned in episode 7, we are in relationship with everything, because the central premise of A Course in Miracles is that everything happens in the mind. What this means is that what we feel about and the way we experience any relationship and or anything that takes place in that relationship, along with what we think of the other party or parties involved in that relationship, is the projection of our perception of it or them, and not because of something that is inherent to it or them. Now, this doesn't mean that a person may not be actually behaving in a certain way, or that the thing you're seeing is not in the specific form in which it appears, or that it's not there. But that the way you think and feel about that person or thing rests solely on your perception or your judgment of that person or the thing, and specifically as something that exists outside of you or is taking place outside of you. The Course calls the myriad relationships in which we find ourselves in the world as special relationships, because from the perspective of the Course, they are all substitutes for the lack we feel and experience as a result of believing the ego's thought system that says we've separated from God. A special relationship is defined as a relationship based on some kind of specialness. I'm using air quotes here, with a person or a thing. And it usually involves having some kind of a special or exclusive arrangement with either the thing or the person. We perceive it or them as special in some way. We think or expect that we can get some form of special treatment from either being with or associating with that particular person or thing. And usually because we believe we can, or we think, or we hope or expect that we can or will feel more special, and in particular, often thinking it will provide something we perceive we're lacking in some way. The Course would call this a special love relationship. And so this would include the relationships that exist between lovers, friends, or anyone with whom we don't consider an enemy. But we can also have special hate relationships. And those exist with objects or people that we don't perceive as friends, or that we perceive to be threatening or that can do us harm in some way. In either case, though, these relationships stem from the belief in separation and are always experienced in forms of lack, threat, feelings of unworthiness, self-doubt, vulnerability, just various forms that suggest you are an individual and separate as opposed to being part of something whole. In other words, special in some way. Our special relationships, then, are the perfect classrooms for recognizing and releasing judgment, because our relationship partners are literally, well, our relationships and our relationship partners are literally repositories for our thoughts of judgment. When we realize the way we see and experience the other in any relationship is not because of something inherent in them, but because we're seeing them through the lens of the ego's thought system of separation, we also realize that what we're seeing or experiencing is coming from a perspective of fear and judgment from within our mind. That realization gives us the opportunity to choose the Holy Spirit's thought system instead, so we can then look at those same relationships from the perspective of love and truth instead of fear and judgment. The Course refers to this as making our relationships holy, because when we choose the Holy Spirit's thought system, we automatically release the thoughts of judgment that would be projected onto our relationships and relationship partners, allowing us to perceive them from a perspective of wholeness or holiness, if you want to put it that way. The process of making our relationships holy is the process of forgiveness, because it is seeing past the illusion that anything in any form can give you anything, because you realize you're lacking nothing to begin with. This creates a shift in your perception of all your relationships along with your relationship partners. So thoughts of judgment don't come up in the first place. And this is what makes relationships the perfect classrooms for releasing judgment. So that's it for Relationships Part 2 and our topic for this week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the podcast for Understanding the Language of A Course in Miracles. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review, subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and please invite your friends to listen. Have a great week, and see you on the podcast next Wednesday.